It's really comes down to building the EMR to help facilitate a clean claim process in order to achieve the 99.999% plus collection rate that we often talk about. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Demos. My name is Thomas Schreiber, and I'm Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical therapy and occupational therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's demo, I'm joined by Adam Peacock, the Chief Revenue Officer at Strata. And today we dive into the features of Strata's EMR and RCM, including pricing, onboarding, dashboards, scheduling, documentation, and lots more. If you'd like to learn more about Strata, head over to StrataPT.com or email us at hello@StrataPT.com. Now, without further delay, here's today's demo. All right, so Adam, we've seen a lot of changes in the industry over the past decade or so as it relates to billing and EMRs. How would you describe these changes? And let's kind of talk about what Strata has been doing to help practice owners run and operate, a successful practice.
Yeah, absolutely. The landscape has definitely changed both on the technology side and the on the billing side for the past decade, and even more in the recent years. We've seen a pickup. A lot of payers, a lot of changes that are getting rolled down from the payers, but also just the needs of practices to leverage greater technology to run more efficiently. So we've always looked at it from a couple different angles here, not just the EMR, not just the billing, but how do we create an end-to-end solution where everything is all supported by a single platform, but also supported by a single company? And for years, especially in the PT/OT speech industry, there's been a lot of fragmentation that we've seen, where practices have been so used to seeing. Practices have been so used to using multiple systems, one to manage their schedule, one to manage their documentation, another one for their billing. And at the end of the day, they hope and pray that they'll communicate with each other. And we've always looked and said, if we can, the goal here is to not just depend on a bunch of integrations and gluing different platforms together. And that's really, when we look at Strata EMR and what we've done as a company over the past 10 years or so, is to develop an all-inclusive system that's built from the ground up that brings the EMR, brings all the billing, revenue cycle management under one platform supported by a single company. But the other important piece of that is when we look at what is revenue cycle management? How do you actually define that? For revenue cycle management hasn't been is as well known of a topic in the therapy industry. It's been more focused on, hey, I need to find a billing company, or I need to find a biller to help manage our billing. And instead of looking at it from everything from electronic patient intake all the way through to the payment, and when those payments arrive, we over the years, as we've seen a lot of this fragmentation come about, we've always looked at it and said, let's continue to build the EMR platform around what we call being billing aware. And that it's really comes down to building the EMR to help facilitate a clean claim process in order to achieve the 99.999% plus collection rate that we often talk about. And the reality is without the EMR being billing aware and being built around the idea of how do we, whether that's as simple as making sure there's data validation for demographic information, making sure that Medicare eligibility is automatically being run to rule out things like Medicare replacement plans. All of that has an impact on that claim process, and that's where we built the EMR to help facilitate that clean claim process, and that's the only reason we're able to drive such a high collection rate. But at the end of the day, practices are still looking for greater solutions in terms of how do we manage not only the billing process, but everything from scheduling and eligibility, authorization management. You look at a lot of the commercial payers that have rolled out, new rules in terms of authorizing certain CPT codes or authorizing certain per visit, per unit. A lot of different ways that these authorizations have really evolved over the number of years. And again, how do we can either hire more people, or a practice can either hire additional admin staff, or they can leverage greater technology. So that's when we look at, again, with the EMR being built around, being billing aware and being built around, billing and revenue cycle management at the core. It allows us to be able to add a lot of those safeguards in the platform to help facilitate a clean claim process and get paid, make sure practices are getting paid everything they're owed. Now, the other side of that is, again, operational efficiency. We look and say, it's not just about getting paid. That's what I consider, bread and butter here at Strata. But also, how do we make it easier for practices and front desk staff and admin staff to schedule appointments, make it easier for patients to receive appointment reminders and, check in remotely. How do we make it easier for clinicians to document and making sure they're documented in a compliant way? So all of those different, we look at all the different pieces between what we call front end, middle, cycle and back end processes. This is where we bring all this together under, again, a single platform that's managed by a single company. And that's really the big difference we see between a lot of the fragmentation that we've had with a lot of practices that are using at least 2 systems, but oftentimes even, 3 or 4 systems. So when we talk about, again, the EMR, Strata EMR, and it's often say the industry obviously didn't need just another EMR. And I think that's fair to say. And a lot of practice owners and, consultants would agree with that. But I think what the industry did need is a EMR that was, again, what we call billing aware, that was built around the idea of how do we make sure that practices are collecting every dollar owed? How do we, not only making sure they're getting paid, but how do we improve the experience for their patients? Whether that's making it easier for them to pay their bills, easier to schedule appointments. How do we improve the morale for practice owners, operators, and the rest of their team by making, allowing them to use a single system to manage the practice day to day? And all this rolls down to, eliminating multiple system dependencies, in order to have an EMR that's not only, regardless of what stage you are in the practice, it's designed to allow you to continue to scale. And if your goal is to continue to grow and add additional locations or add additional clinicians, then the platform is designed to support that without without adding additional fees and software fees that we often see. But at the end of the day, practice owners, as margins have gotten tighter with reimbursement that's declining over the years, the need to run more lean and more efficient has never been more important. So a lot of, when we look at the Strata EMR and the idea of, again, bringing a lot of automation and workflows to practices so they can hire less staff, be able to, achieve the higher collection rate that we often talk about. So clinical documentation, that's always been, over the years, how do we reduce the amount of time it takes for clinicians to document? One of the $1 million questions is always, hey, how long does it take for us to do an initial evaluation, or how long does it take to do a daily note or a progress note in Strata EMR? There's a lot of different variables there, of course. But the other question that's not often asked is, how do we ensure that our therapists are billing what they should be billing, based on all the different payer rules, whether that's Medicare, Aetna, Blue Cross, certain CPT code combinations. And that's where, when we go back to, talking about Strata EMR really being billing aware and being able to take a lot of the back end payer rules and requirements and industry regulations to bring that to the front end. So therapists can be much more proactive in terms of, the treatment that's being provided and making sure that it's actually going to be reimbursable. Now, the other side of that too is clinical compliance, obviously, as the continues to be more and more important as different payers roll out different rules in terms of different compliance requirements. And we've seen that just recently. You look at what United Healthcare, for example, rolled out with the time in and time out requirement. We look at things like that as they come about and say, how do we make it easy for a practice to automatically alert or require the therapist to enter time in and time out? In the past, they haven't had to. And when Medicare discontinued the need to put, time in and time out. So now it's a matter of clinicians having to retrain their brain to figure out, hey, for this payer, I have to include time in and time out. For this payer, I don't. For this payer, I can document, I can provide this treatment. For this one, I can't. There's a lot of different moving parts. And again, that's when we look at, providing that real-time payer, feedback based on those rules. And it really just adds a lot of safeguards, again, to facilitate a clean claim process and make sure practices are getting paid everything they're owed. Now, on the clinical, efficiency side of things, you also, the ability to be able to customize and create very specific protocol templates. At the end of the day, we've recognized for many years that every practice, operates a little bit differently. They have different patients they focus, whether it's a neuro practice, an ortho practice, more that's focused on women's health or pediatrics. So the ability to create very specific custom protocols, is another big part of just, bringing greater clinical efficiency to these practices. Clinical compliance is always going to be one of those painful manual processes for practices. Over the years, there's been a lot of days, a lot of hours that have been spent for clinicians or owners or operators that are doing chart reviews. So another big piece of what we've really implemented here with Strata as it relates to the documentation is being able to make sure set up the templates, set up the documentation in a way that can be made to ensure that it's compliant for specific payers even. So we all know CMS has very specific clinical documentation requirements that are required. A lot of the commercial payers as well. And at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out how do we make sure that I's are dotted, T's are crossed, without having to get into a situation where a medical necessity review is done. They review that documentation and it's missing half of the things that are required. So clinical, taking a lot of that, what's been known to, and what's really, where practices have spent a lot of time in the past doing a lot of reactive chart auditing. We've taken that and put that up on the front end by, again, setting up this clinical documentation in a way where it's much more proactive and doesn't allow that documentation to be actually completed or submitted for billing until it's, we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Provider, patient, and communication. This is another area when we talk about, how do we bridge the gap not only between our billing and RCM team and practices, but also between practices and their patients. And this is where, the EMR being built around, again, how do we facilitate a clean claim process? But a lot of that is also just communication. How do we ensure that practices have the support they need if they have a question to be able to reach out to their dedicated account manager and actually get an answer back on that same day without having to wait days and weeks? So, all of the different, that communication, customer service, and what I mentioned before is it's not just the EMR, it's not just the service, it's not just the data. It's about how all of that works together in order for practice owners and their team to not only have a level of support, but also be able to run a very efficient and profitable practice. So, a couple of the communication tools, when patients receive an appointment reminder, they have the ability to not only confirm that appointment, but also to be able to check in remotely as well. If a provider or practice owner has a question related to billing or any type of patient processing, doesn't make any difference. The idea there is to be able to have a single point of contact to be able to reach out and get answers to your question, and that's super important to us. When it comes to a lot of the tasks, task management, we often talk about workflow automation. The goal here is to really figure out how do we bridge the gap between the administrative, the billing RCM, the clinical, patient engagement, referral management, all the different moving parts that it takes to run a successful practice. And that's where, we've always operated under what we call more of an event-driven push notification model. And to put that in plain English, really, it's designed to prevent practice owners and their team from having to constantly pull reports each morning to figure out, hey, what needs attention, what auths are expiring, what patient co-pays or co-insurance do we need to collect today. All of that's designed to, every day when you log in or throughout the day, 24/7, to be able to look on your dashboard and say, hey, here are the administrative tasks. We need to make sure we're collecting co-pays for this patient, or we need to make sure we're completing documentation and submitting for that patient. It just makes it very, very transparent and really breaks down the silos between all the different, parts that it takes to run a practice. Provider and patient scheduling. This is always, when we look at the, practices are looking for a new EMR. Oftentimes that scheduling is really a core piece of, making sure they have an efficient way to schedule, making sure that the schedule can be set up in a way that's, customizable and specific to their practice. But the other side is, how do we, again, bridge the gap between practice owners and patients, giving them an easy way to not only confirm their appointment, but also check in remotely, or if they need to reschedule, to be able to send a message that shows up on the dashboard without having to send anything over email. So a lot of that, again, going back to bridging the gap between practices and patients. And, it's not just a schedule. Sure, you can document and add different custom appointment types and have a wait list and, look at the schedule for each of your facilities. But, it also comes down to, how do we also include, in the check-in process, if that patient has a copay, if they have an outstanding balance, if they're nearing expiration of their authorization, and we need to, making sure that they're not getting overscheduled, or patients that are active, let's say active accounts, but they're not on the schedule in the next 30 days. All of those, that's where a lot of this workflow automation comes in as it relates to the scheduling. Just at the end of the day, make life easier for practices to to manage, making sure we continue to build out a high caseload. Again, how do we help practices reduce things like their cancellation rate? And all of that leads to additional visits that can be seen, additional dollars that can be generated for practices, which is all plays into this what I talked about in terms of the end-to-end revenue cycle management. Patient engagement, it's always been, over the past couple of years in particular, we've seen really an increase in patients wanting to have the ability to pay their bill online or schedule appointments or fill out their intake paperwork. And some of this through the adoption of this, depending on the demographics. I know for practices here in Florida, some of the more geriatric patient population, they've surprised us a little bit in terms of how willing they are to want to fill out consent forms and patient registration forms and health questionnaires electronically. But this is where things are going to continue to evolve. And I think patient engagement, as it relates to not only the operational efficiency side in terms of scheduling and patient intake, filling out documents and everything, that's one side. But the other piece is, how do we bring greater transparency to the financial processing? How do we make sure that patients aren't receiving statements inaccurately? And that's been a big problem, I think, in the industry over the years, where a lot of frustration and a lot of practice owners have really had hesitation with working with third-party companies to manage their billing in fear that their patients are going to receive an inaccurate statement. And and a lot of this comes down to it's, again, both sides, not just the technology, but it's also the entire billing revenue cycle management team that's behind the scenes working to make sure that patients balances are accurate. And then once they are posted and those balances are available, then giving the practices the ability to set up what we call an automated balance alert, where that patient can receive a text or an email every 2 weeks and be able to click, within 3 clicks and pay their bill. Also allow patients to be able to look at a very clean statement that is going to show every data service they were treated for, the status of that, whether that's already been paid in full, whether that's pending, still pending processing with insurance, or whether it's still pending the patient, and that's where their balance is originating from. So, giving a lot more transparency, not only for practice owners and their team, but also for their patients, is a big part of what our focus has been on over the years. Because again, it all goes back to, you can provide the best treatment in the world, and that patient leaves super happy and they're feeling great. But if they get a statement 2 weeks later for a bill that is inaccurate, then it can tarnish that relationship. And that's really focusing on making sure that patients have a good experience is just as important on the financial and billing side as well. So patient engagement, that again, patient satisfaction, and having the ability for patients to be able to, an easy way for them to communicate, what their experience has been with their practice is also another core focus of not only, seeing how the patient felt about the therapy that was provided, but also, how do they feel about the intake process, the billing process, so both the clinical care, the billing, the operational, all of that can be captured here through the automated patient satisfaction, and what we call, patient re-engagement. So whether that's after, halfway through treatment, they're getting through their plan of care and you want to check in with them, or whether you want to check in with them after they've been discharged to determine, what their degree of satisfaction is. All of that data is then captured on a practice dashboard here. So these KPI dashboards are all real time. So as texts are going to patients or emails are being sent to them to rate their satisfaction, all that data comes back in, can be used to really be able to have very clean and objective data to determine, hey, how are we performing as a team? And there are areas that we can improve, or there are areas that we can also, really, sing it from the rooftops in terms of, hey, this is why patients love coming to our practice. So that, sending out those texts or email, being able to capture that data, but then also being able to then direct them to your Google or Facebook reviews to be able to, increase your online, review exposure. And I think that's where, a lot of this, when we look at bringing this full circle, again, it's not just about the billing. It's not just about the EMR. It's about how can we continue to provide, a great experience for both providers and their patients. So provider and patient financial clarity, this is again over the years when we look at a lot of the frustration that we've seen by practice owners and just really the healthcare industry as a whole. I think we can all agree that we've all at some point in life received a statement that's been inaccurate. But a lot of this comes down to how do we bring that data, keep that data in front of practice owners and their team to be able to look at any time and see, how are claims processing for this patient without having to actually do the work of making sure they get processed. So, this clarity panel that we rolled out, many years ago was it really in response to that. A lot of practice owners and I would talk to where they didn't even have access to an AR report, or maybe that was the only report they did have access to. So, the idea is how do we provide, a play by play of everything that's happens from the time those charges are submitted till the time that claims are processed by primary, secondary, and payment is received. And I can sit here and tell you how wonderful our team is, and our billing and RCM team is incredible. But at the end of the day, this is an objective way to actually monitor that. And I think that's important to make sure there shouldn't be any secrets as what the status is for not only the company as a whole, but also every single patient account, every single data service. You should be able to see a play-by-play of exactly what's being done to get you paid. And that's comes down, and that should also bleed down into the patient. We look at the patient's ability to receive a text and pull up, on their mobile device and say, hey, here's, I understand where my, $53 balance is coming from, and I can see that this has been processed through my primary and my secondary. So that financial transparency, again, is going to continue to be a heavy focus for Strata in the years to come. And I think that practices, that's what they should require. And at the end of the day, that lack of transparency has really I think led to a lot of mistrust and a lot of over-promising, under-delivering, by companies. And it's not for necessarily for a lack of trying, but it's for the lack of technology that's available to be able to provide this type of a clean dashboard for every single patient. So practices, as practices are going through their day to day and charges are being submitted and patients are being scheduled and referrals are being received, a lot of data is being captured. And for years, a lot of practices have used a lot of different spreadsheets and end up being forced to really create their own Excel spreadsheets so they can slice and dice it 10 different ways because they didn't have access to clean data to begin with, but also they didn't have a good way to be able to monitor that in real time. So all the KPI dashboards that we've put together, both on the operational side, financial side, clinical side, but also patient engagement and marketing, to figure out what, who are our top referral sources, what does our conversion rate look like? How are our patients feeling about the services that were provided? How are we trending month over month or, quarter over quarter, in terms of our financial metrics, payments that are coming in from patients, payments that are being processed by insurance. All of that data is coming in and being presented on these KPI dashboards in real time. And again, this goes back to having access to very clean data, and being able to, sure, if you want to do an export and put it into Excel and come up with another creative way to look at the data, you can absolutely do that. But the goal here is to eliminate the time you have to spend combing through and kind of structuring the data in a way that makes it easy to read. And a lot of this data too is just designed to, again, to drive greater efficiency and allow you to have objective data to be able to make really sound business decisions in terms of, hey, is it time to add an additional location? Let's say you have multiple locations, or you have even a single location. Either way, all of these all these KPI dashboards are designed at the practice level, but also at the individual facility level as well. And for any mobile therapist, you also have the ability to break this down by geography. So although it's not a brick and mortar physical location, a lot of mobile practices will also structure their setup and the data in a way where they can look and say, how's this geography performing versus another geography, whether that's different cities, different states, doesn't make any difference. But at the end of the day, the idea here is to have access to as much data as possible, be able to read it in a very easy, and efficient way, but then to be able to use that to actually, drive the business forward.
Adam, there's a lot of clinics that they're either fully they're fully mobile, or they have a part of their business that is mobile as well. Let's just talk about how Strata helps those types of practices.
Yeah, great question. So the mobile therapist is really, we've seen over the past couple of years in particular, especially after we saw a lot of changes in the reimbursement of the Part A space. Mobile therapists were, a lot of these therapists have worked in the home health setting for many years. But one of the constant complaints that and frustrations that, based on just market research and feedback was that they were just tired of using legacy systems that didn't really make it easy for them to plan their day, to do any kind of routing and optimization. Many of these therapists would spend Sunday evenings, typing in the, patient addresses just to figure out, hey, how am I going to, what's the most efficient route so I'm not driving all over the map, and that's really where, based on that feedback, we looked and said, hey, how can we make clinicians' life a lot easier without them having to spend Sunday evening plugging all these patient addresses into Google. So this is the mobile therapist technology here is a great example of really, how we look at things, and when we receive feedback like that, to be able to solve those types of problems. And this is really when this technology in particular also, it just has a direct impact on that employee morale that I've talked about before. And you can see, with a direct connection with Google, therapists can plug in, schedule their patients, and the system's going to automatically calculate the most efficient route for them. It's going to tell them, what's their total drive time, total miles. And for those practice owners that are paying therapists based on a per unit or per visit, it's also going to keep track of all of the, the productivity metrics there, and allow therapists to keep track of that on their iPhone or, whatever mobile device they're using. Now, the other piece of that is too, going back to the communication between the therapist and their patients, giving them an easy way to click a button and get directions, or call their patient, or text their patient, or access the documentation, again, all from their mobile device. Electronic visit verification, again, another, although not a requirement for all payers, yet, I think in the years to come, we'll see electronic visit verification become more popular, like we've seen in some other disciplines. And really, the mobile therapist technology that we have is really designed around allowing those therapists to be able to have an easy way to complete electronic visit verification, to capture GPS coordinates and figure out, and allow that patient to sign off and say, yes, the therapist did, provide this treatment for today, whatever day that is. So, it's oftentimes where, one of the other pain points that mobile therapists have come across in the past is patients that may or may not remember exactly what day the therapist was there. So this just gives them a lot more, gives them a tool to really be able to capture that, document that, very quickly. And, that way, when that billing is submitted for that data service, then it just eliminates the uncertainty of whether that therapist was actually at their home or not.
Sure, there's a lot of clinics and folks out there listening that may have a little bit of a fear of making a change or migrating from their current EMR. Talk to me about the onboarding process.
Yeah, change is never something that people say, "Hey, I love change. I love change." Very few people I've heard say that over the years. And I think that onboarding process is understanding that onboarding process is a big part of that. As practice owners are looking at the different options, and if they're using multiple systems, and their goal, they'd like to use a single system. The next question comes, well, what is that migration process going to look like? Is this going to, is revenue going to come to a screeching halt? Or, am I going to have to be tasked with setting up EDI, ERA enrollments for all of my payers? And that's the onboarding dashboard that we have here, is really designed to, again, give complete transparency into all of the steps that are required in order to, in order to provide a very successful migration. Whether that's from, making sure that I's are dotted, T's are crossed, we have all the documents we need on the billing side, to also, making sure that our team is responsible for providing the full service EDI, ERA, and setup. And a lot of times we hear, it's another area where some companies may provide, yeah, we'll set up EDI, we'll set up ERA for Medicare and some of the large payers, but what does that look like on an ongoing basis? And that's a big part of not only making sure things are set up right from the beginning, but also making sure that practices have that ongoing support, whether they're 30 days, 60 days, 1, 2, 3 years, into partnering with Strata, And if they have a question, being able to have a single point of contact where they can either pick up the phone and reach them directly, or they can shoot them a message through the platform here. So that's a big part of that customer onboarding and data migration, all full service, all included. And I think at the end of the day, we schedule, we set up that onboarding process in a way where when we pick a go live date, that is the date we're going to be submitting claims as well. So, all too often, I think there's been, some fear from practices that have made transitions in the past where their revenue got put on hold for 2, 4, 6, I've heard up to 12 weeks, and really that's just unacceptable, and shouldn't happen. So, again, the goal here is to, just have a very transparent way for practices to see, hey, here are the steps that are going to take for us to make this change. Here's the schedule that we're going to follow, and being able to have, just very, very open and direct communication with our team, to make sure that we help them make a smooth transition.
So what is this all going to cost me is another pretty big topic. Adam, let's talk about the Strata pricing model.
Yeah, of course, and I think cost should be a big topic to really figure out. At the end of the day, practice owners want to make sure they're running a profitable practice. And a lot of this comes down to understanding what we often refer to as the true cost of ownership. When we look at a lot of what it's going to take to manage the billing, what it's going to take to get the EMR set up. Are we adding users? Are we paying per user? Are we paying a percentage of collections? What does that really look like? And I think it's easy for practices to see on their P&L of this is what I'm paying for the software, the EMR. This is what I'm paying for the billing, whether that's in-house or a third-party company. In-house, obviously, breaking it down to figure out what are those additional supplies that are needing, claim forms, envelopes, different things for those payers that can't go electronic. What are we paying? How much of our admin staff or billing staff is allocated towards making sure that billing's being done. So that's pretty, oftentimes that's a pretty straightforward, it's pretty straightforward to be able to look at those costs, straight off your P&L. But the other costs that are associated that are often overlooked is what is our true collection rate? Is how much money is actually being written off, and do I have, access to be able to actually see that in the reporting, whether that's an in-house or working with a third-party company. And all too often I talk with practice owners who don't have a very clear picture of what their true collection rate is or what money is being written off for whatever reason, and I think that's, again, an important piece of going back to financial transparency and making sure practice owners have a way to be able to access their data and see exactly what's going on for not only the practice as a whole, but every single patient account, every single charge line, because every one of those charge lines obviously translates into dollars. So, with our pricing, when we talk about a fully aligned partnership pricing, again, that sounds maybe a little hand wavy as well. But the idea here is if a practice is not generating dollars and making money, then Strata's not making any money. And I think that's important, regardless of whether, practices work with Strata or not. The idea is they shouldn't be paying for software that's not helping them generate any dollars, and a lot of practices that that have therapists, as they add additional therapists, are looking at that and saying that additional therapist is going to cost me an extra, $100, $200, $300 a month, regardless of whether we generate any dollars, regardless of whether that therapist actually sees any patients, and we've come the other direction with that at Strata to, that and have a firm belief that the software should be free, and that practices should only pay a percentage of what of the dollars that are actually collected. So, software fees, onboarding fees, per user fees, clearinghouse fees. We often joke about unicorn fees. We're joking there, but the reality is there's been so many add-on fees that a lot of EMR companies, and again, I won't pick on anybody in particular, but I think it's been pretty clear that the industry has, that model on the EMR side has been so focused on per user fees or per feature fees or per facility fees, and we just don't agree with that. So, so a little different model, actually much different model, in terms of in terms of making sure that practices are only paying for, if they're actually making money. And that's where we continue to, help practices increase their margins and continue to grow if that's their goal.
So obviously we're going to see a lot of both payer and industry changes in the years to come. Let's talk about how Strata thinks about the future and the ways which we plan on helping practice owners navigate the changes.
Yeah, good question. I think we think about the future the same way we've thought about the past number of years, in terms of how do we consistently bring more value to practices through greater technology and greater services. And a lot of that when we talk about the driving a very high collection rate and in being able to provide practice with a single platform to be able to run and really grow their practice. A lot of that comes down to a lot of the technology automation that we've developed over the years, without adding an additional price tag to it. So if I could geek out for just a moment here, a lot of this, not that practice owners really care about things like robotic process automation or machine learning or OCR, but again, I think what they do care about are ways to more efficiently run their practice. How do we make it easier for the referral intake process? How do we make it easier for our team to schedule patients? How do we make it easier for our clinical staff to be able to document? And at the end of the day, how do we make sure that we're getting paid every dollar owed? And a lot of that comes through not only a great team on the billing revenue cycle management side, but also a lot of technology, to be able to drive a lot of automation for practice owners without them having to spend a lot of money, to bring that technology into their practice. So that technology automation, I think it's going to continue to evolve as different changes come about in the industry, whether that's payer changes, regulatory changes. We're constantly looking at ways that we can provide more and more value through the technology, so that practices worry less about those changes in the future that are going to come. At this point, nobody has a crystal ball, obviously, but I think it's fair to say that things are going to continue to evolve, and the technology needs to make sure whatever company that you're partnering with, we need to make sure that they're in a position to be able to support that through much more greater and modern technology.
Thanks for listening to another Strata demo. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical therapy and occupational therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata, head over to stratapt.com or email us at hello@stratapt.com.